Good evening. My name is Ganithan Kori, and I am the Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Art Museum. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to tonight's conversation with the brilliant artist, Stephen Hamilton. You can see Stephen's works all over Boston now, a piece at the ICA, he has a piece at Roxbury Community College, and very importantly, and the focus of this evening's program, he has a stunning major work at the Rose Art Museum. The work is part of a group show titled Fabricated Imaginaries, Crafting Art. You see a small section of the group here in the slide of the group show with Stephen's work right here in good company with Chris O'Feely and Jamal Cyrus, Nick Cave, and many others. There are over 30 artworks from across the globe in this exhibition, and they're from different cultures, traditions, modes of art making, but they share commonalities. They challenge fine arts norms and hierarchies and enhance our understanding of the versatility, possibilities, and materiality of visual expression. They also expand the notion of what art is and can be. I remember encountering Stephen's work, Tukula, Second Moment of the Sun, which you will hear about tonight at Lysan Keen's Gallery in 2022. I also met Stephen there for the first time and was riveted by his creative practice. It's quite a complex creative practice and iconography. So to decipher it all, I knew we needed an expert, and we knew just the person for the job. I'm delighted to introduce Kyrah Malika Daniels. She is an assistant professor of African American Studies at Emory University, and her research centers on African heritage religions, sacred arts, religious initiation and conversion, ritual healing, and other aspects of the Black Atlantic. Her first book, Art of the Healing Gods, is going to be published next year by Duke University Press. She is also the author of a fascinating essay about Stephen Hamilton's work. The article is titled Indigo, Camwood, and Woven Cloth, the Kongo, Dikenga, and Yorùbá Ancestry in Stephen Hamilton's Sacred Artistry. I learned everything I know from this article. And Kyrah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And now the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and introduction, Ganit. It's a pleasure to be joining you all, and I'm honored to be joining my friend, my colleague. Stephen Hamilton is such a dear person to me and in my community. And so it's a real pleasure to be joining him in conversation about his work. I'm going to take a moment to introduce him formally, and then we will launch into a conversation where we'll have an opportunity to see more of his works. Tukula is, in fact, part of a larger series. We'll be discussing process, artistic inspiration, and more. So tune in and looking forward to everything to come. Stephen Hamilton is a mixed media artist, researcher, and arts educator living and working in Boston, Massachusetts. He is currently a PhD candidate in Harvard University's African and African American Studies department, focusing on African studies and African history. Hamilton graduated from Massachusetts College of Art and Design in 2009 with a focus on illustration. Thanks to a travel grant from Arts Connect International, he studied Yoruba weaving, dyeing, and wood carving at the Nikkei Centers for Art and Culture in Oshogbo and Ogidi, Ijumu, Nigeria. He also served as an assistant professor in the illustration department of Massachusetts College of Art and Design between 2016 and 2021. Hamilton has worked on temporary site-specific large-scale mixed media textile and sculpture installations for the past 7 years. These include Under the Spider's Web, 2025, currently installed at Roxbury Community College in Boston, Massachusetts, as part of the Boston Public Art Triennial. The Founders Project, 2018 to 2019, previously located at the Bruce C. Balling Building, and Stitched into Memory, 2017, previously located at Atlantic Wharf, also in Boston, Massachusetts. Hamilton's work is in the permanent collections of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, the Rose Museum at Brandeis University, and the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. Here I have to say that I had the opportunity to meet Stephen Hamilton through a beloved and cherished friend and colleague of ours, Leila Bermeo. Dr. Bermeo is curator at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts and invited us to join in conversation several years ago, maybe 2017, 2018. It's been some time, and I've treasured the opportunity since then to get to know Stephen, his artistry, his research, and his work more broadly speaking. We are going to begin with a set of reflections on four studies done in charcoal as a series of Black portraiture. And Stephen, I want to invite you to share with us some of the inspiration behind these works and also the process of creating. Many of us who know your work and who have had the opportunity to see your work in person are familiar with the vibrancy of your color palette. We're familiar with your weaving tradition, with your wood carving, your metalwork, and of course, your painting. But this work was new for me. And so I'd love to invite you to offer a few reflections on these studies, both with regards to process and with regards to what it means to create Black portraiture.
Thank you so much. And thank you both. Thank you, Ganit. Thank you, Kyrah. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with all of you this evening. Um, when it comes to these studies, I really enjoy drawing as a practice. Charcoal was one of the first mediums that I used, when I was like undergoing like my first sort of taste of like art training. So like I had the privilege of being part of the high school program at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. And that was actually my first introduction to like working with charcoal seriously as a medium, and I like fell in love with it. And the way that we used to work back then is we used to do these sort of master copies of not necessarily master copies, but we would do these value studies that were based off of black and white photography.
Mm.
And that's sort of like the aesthetic that I sort of go for with this. Like I'm very much inspired by like this sort of aesthetic of black and white photography and thinking about how it relates to like these depictions of black people. And it allows me to like sort of understand like how I'm going to play with value, with light. This is also a part of like the practice that very much helps me understand how I'm going to capture likeness before I move on to working with the paintings, which again, because they're on these sort of like larger, more complicated um, uh, textile pieces, you really need to figure things out first a little bit before you start working on the canvas, which is like precious because so much labor goes into it. And for these studies specifically, these were tied to a series that I did called Between the River and the Forest. And that was based off of photographs of my cousin, who also loves black and white photography, my cousin Stacey Hamilton, photos that we collaborated on. Um, and what was important in those images is that they looked like the people. They didn't have to be exact copies, but they needed to look like the people that we were depicting, because part of it was sort of reconciling their personalities, how they wanted to be depicted as individuals, with these references from pre-colonial African or traditional African like art and iconography. So it was like very important that they looked like the subjects. Um, so, those charcoal studies allowed me really to sort of capture the likeness and also to sensitively like figure out important elements of like these portraits before I started painting. And I also just really enjoyed them as like not only exercises, but as pieces themselves. And I think that, part of that is like what also drew folks to those pieces, drew folks to those pieces like when they were on display next to like the finished artwork. I think, when you're looking at like my work, like sort of like what it has been since like 2016 or 2015, 2016, so like for the past 10 years, these like sort of like big, like installations, um, these sort of big textile installations, like the drawing is something that is a big part of that that's sort of unseen. There's all of this sort of work that goes into it before the piece is made that's beyond like just the actual like sort of finished piece. And I think people are beginning to understand more of like the weaving and the carving and the dyeing and like the textile part of it. But like again, my background is as an illustrator. My background is as like a painter, as a painter as well. So that's also a big part of that. This is actually a portrait, a side profile portrait of my cousin Stacy, who's also the photographer. Is also the photographer who I collaborated with on the photography aspects of it. And I'm happy to say that this is also in the Rose Art Museum collection. I'm very happy that these pieces are there. And, you know, it's very much a reflection of my love of the medium, but also thinking about like the importance of portraiture in my work.
Mhm. Thank you so much. I imagine that there will be folks who are curious to know about who these figures are gazing back at us. And one of the things that I also thought might be of interest to mention briefly here, is the fact that your emphasis of medium here is an invitation to reflect on why certain mediums have been used historically and still are used today in artisanal practices on the continent.
Hmm.
Through conversations that you and I have had, we know, of course, of the importance of camwood, which we'll discuss soon. We know of the importances of indigo, and we know of the importances of chalk and white chalk. And so that's one of
Hmm.
the things that comes through most clearly here because these are charcoal on what appears to be white paper. You see that the figures before us glow with an evanescence and a sense of inner beauty, like iwapele of good character, but they do seem to emanate with a white glow.
Hmm.
Not in, it's not lost on me that kaolin clay,
Hmm.
has been used across West and Central Africa as a sacred substance, a cooling medicine, with healing properties. So if you could share with us briefly who these figures are, and I'll scroll through them again.
Oh, awesome. So this is Colette. Colette was one of the models who participated in the open artist call. Just like a natural model, also like very beautiful, like also brought a very like beautiful like energy to the project as well. And we took a lot of different images of her. There were different photos that were like sort of like inspired by different elements of like art and iconography in West and West Central Africa. So one was an image that was inspired by a manifestation of Ashon called Yemese.
Mm.
Yemese is from the town of Ido, and she's known as a warrior. So this is a manifestation of the goddess Ashon, who sort of revealed herself through a market woman and times of war and slavery when people had come and captured the people of Ido. She, said to call on me, and she was not a kingly woman, but a simple woman in the market. And when they had come and taken them, she sprang into action and she defeated their captors.
Mm.
So it sort of is a representative of like an aspect of Vashon that sort of goes beyond like the very popular images of Vashon that circulate in the media. It's like this, beautiful woman with like that wears like golden or yellow clothes, but like sort of talks to sort of the complicated nature of Oshun as like a healer, but also a protector, a warrior. The fact that she's a market woman is also something that's really important. So thinking about the importance of Oshun when it comes to wealth and commerce for Yoruba women, but also this idea of her as a protector, as a warrior, as somebody who's um, sort of like bucks like gender norms. There's a very
Mm.
interesting aspect of that is that it appears in like these idealized images of African women, these miraculous women, these special women who, like both conform to gender norms but also buck against them, that are like completely like contrary to them. And like in conversations with Colette, like that was something that really came out that I really
Mm.
enjoyed. In addition to her just being naturally a very good a very beautiful model.
Mm.
The second image is of Sean.
Mm.
What I liked about Sean is also like a professional model. Like he was
Mm.
also somebody who had like done this work professionally that responded to the call. We're also connected through networks. Like most of these are Boston people, so we're also connected through like other networks in the art scene in Boston. And what I enjoyed about like Sean, in addition to him being a natural model, is like thinking about like this idea of like masculinity as it exists in many cultures in West Central Africa, but particularly in Yoruba land, as it relates to the adherence of as it relates to worshippers of Shango. So Shango is a deity associated with fire, with lightning, with like heat. He's also a deity that is associated with the royal family at Oyo. He is a deity that originates in Oyo, which is a important kingdom in Yoruba land. But Shango also inhabits like this sort of interesting space where he embodies seemingly contradictory elements. He's hot, he's masculine, he's powerful, but he's also very beautiful. They talk about Shango as very beautiful. That's one of the things. I'm also a nerd, I'm a concept artist. That's what frustrates me in depictions of Shango. You're trying to make him Thor, you're trying to make him like this sort of brutish figure. But Shango is very pretty. Like that's how he's talking about when I spoke to
He's a pretty boy.
yeah, when I spoke to, I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to meet Shango Dare Ajala, who is a very prominent Shango priest in Oshogbo before he passed away.
Mm.
Brilliant man, just like a man of like impeccable character.
Mm.
But when he described Shango to me, he said Shango is very elegant, right? He wears
Mm.
earrings, he braids his hair, like he's an excellent dancer. Like there's like this element of like very powerful masculine authority, but also like a beauty there, and also a very purposeful adoption of feminine symbols, the
Mm.
hairstyles, the clothing, the earrings. Like he also, some of his earring symbols are like mortars and pestles, which are very feminine symbols. One of the things that Shango adherents will do during like performances that show that the miraculous power of Shango is in addition to eating and breathing fire and razor blades, they'll also break mortars against their chests. So people will pound mortars until they break on their chests, right? Which is also again the mortar is a symbol of like feminine industry. Women are the ones who are pounding yam and manufacturing grain. Like that's like a woman's tool, right? So like there's a way in which he shares that these feminine symbols with his wife, or Yahoo also shares masculine symbols with him. So I was really interested in thinking about how to explore that when we're looking at these images of Black masculinity, which, we don't always want to acknowledge it, but is also there. If you're looking at like elements of hip hop culture, there's ways in which men very purposely, adopt iconography and symbolism, which is coded as feminine. Like that's a part of it. We see that with the like 70s and funk, like we that there's it's not a new
Even
thing.
now, we see
Even
diamond
now,
earrings and beautiful rings
yeah,
and
like
gold
that's not,
chains and
we don't want to
long
always
feminine
acknowledge it.
hair now.
Yeah, we don't always acknowledge it, but that's also part
Yes.
of it. And part of it also comes from the fact that in many African cultures, beauty, whether it's embodied by a man or a woman, is feminine. Like that's how it is interpreted.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
like, with this guy who's like, this young like heterosexual man who's like also like a model and also is like just like an embodiment of like what we're thinking about when we're thinking about a lot of times an average like young black male,
Mm.
like delving into that complexity with the conversations like that we're having with him.
Hmm.
So I really enjoyed. He was also like again very much a model, very easy to work with. But this is a study that I did before I did the piece
Hmm.
that's called Onishango. And for all the people who are Yoruba speakers, please forgive my terrible accent. I'm working on it, y'all. But like the piece I did of Onishango, which are like the people who are possessors of Shango, initiates of Shango. So this is one of the studies that I did.
Mm.
This is a self-portrait that I did. Um, I occasionally do self-portraits. I used to like, I don't necessarily like taking photos or even taking photos of myself. Like that's not something that I particularly enjoy. But I used to make it a habit of periodically doing self-portraits. When I worked at Artistry Uni, I worked at Artistry Uni for years. And one of the things that I would do is like I would lead students through their first project, which was a self-portrait project. And I would use myself as a model. I'd make self-portraits in front of them and just being like, okay, these are how we understand proportion and all of these different things. And I made tons of self-portraits, most of them god awful, but I made a lot of them just to show them like, this is just something that you have to do and you do it continuously. And, sometimes it's going to be terrible and ugly, but that's part of the process of doing it. And like during lockdown, I got into the habit of like just doing these self portraits. So I wanted to make this piece. And I made this piece, I'm not a very vain person, but I made this piece of me alongside this like very famous depiction, what's believed to be a depiction of Oba Lofon, who is one of the Onis of Ife during the classical period in Ile-Ife. The classical period in Ile-Ife, depending on who you ask, is somewhere between the like 13th and 15th centuries, or yeah, somewhere between the 13th and 15th centuries. And he's the one that's most associated with this grand, explosion in the arts, like this naturalistic style of metal work, lost wax casting, and terracotta work. Even weavers that are in and around Ife will associate him with this craft. Like he's associated with this like artistic fluorescence in Ile-Ife, which is also very important because this was a source of a lot of their authority. They controlled the circulation of like the symbols of rule and power and civilization and art and beauty. That was a very big part of it. And one of the important objects from this period was this beautiful, thinly cast, almost pure copper mask. It shows mastery of like of the casting arts. And I also love the features of this mask. It's a famous piece of work. It's a famous piece of artwork from Ile-Ife. I'm not certain whether it would have been used as a utilitarian object, not a utilitarian object, but as a mask itself. But it certainly is capable of it. It has eye slits. It also has all of these like sort of like fitted elements of it, which would suggest that it would be attached to a larger like suit or masquerade apparatus or costume. It also would fit on the head like a mask would. Um, but it is just like a very masterful example of African art that's shown all over the place. You see like a lot of like imagery. You see it a lot in like publications on African art, but like sort of playing around with this image of that and like also my self-portrait.
Mm.
And the beautiful thing about the copper mask is like as it gets like its patina and age, it also begins to have the color of human skin, specifically brown skin or dark brown skin, which I thought was really interesting. And also the reflectiveness of it was really interesting. So playing around with that and like sort of how charcoal can also show like
Mm.
value and light on darker skin was something that I was playing around with this
Mm.
image.
And
So this is an image of my cousin Stacy, who's
Mhm.
like my sister. Like my family, we come from a very close family. Like all of my cousins, my first and second cousins, were just basically siblings. Our grandmothers were our sisters. They're very, very close. We have the same, me and Stacey have the same grandmother, but even my second cousins, who, were the grandchildren of my other grandmothers, which were her sister, were very close. So we call each other siblings. And me and Stacey have the same last name and initials. So I'll just be like my sister and my brother. But my so like with Stacy, like I really wanted to think about the work of Sylvia Arden Boone, who Kyrah and I both love her work, one of the most
Adorable.
underrated art historians ever. First
Ever.
Black tenure professor at Yale, or first Black female tenure professor at Yale. I'm not certain which one, but she did this amazing work with the Sunday Society, on the Sunday Society in what's now Sierra Leone and Liberia, also in some places outside of that. But specifically, she was studying the Mende people and thinking about the importance of beauty and ideas of femininity and feminine power in Mende land. Um, and there's something really beautiful about the way she writes, because she talks about beauty as not only like physical beauty, as like an ethical beauty, like there's a morality which is attached to beauty beyond the physical. And she talks about that beauty and that perfection as it relates to the Sunday mask, but also as it relates to Blackness. And Blackness is a physical concept. So beautiful Black skin as something which is like a sign of physical perfection in this physical world, but also like a deeper, a deeper philosophical connection with Blackness and personhood as it's understood by the Mende, right? So Blackness is like not only tied to beauty, but also these other concerns of civilization amongst the Mende, which is very fascinating. Um, and interestingly, like for the Mende too, like whiteness is also associated with like these sort of positive traits, even though we're not talking about whiteness in terms of white people. They're
Sure.
talking about like whiteness as like a source of spiritual purity
Mhm.
and like the other worlds and all these different things. But I think what's interesting about her work is she really sort of explores like beauty standards and the ideas of beauty amongst the Mende on its own terms. A lot of us talk about decolonizing beauty, but we're not really investigating what that means in a non-Western
Mhm.
context seriously.
That's right.
And she's actually doing that seriously. And she's
Mhm.
talking about that as it relates not only to how we understand like aesthetics amongst the Mindi, but also how women utilize that not only in their daily lives, but how they instrumentalize that through Sunday. And I thought that that was really fascinating. And I wanted to think about that, you know, using a black model who's like related to me, but also to have this conversation about Blackness and femininity and beauty in a way that was not just talking back to Western standards, but also understanding them on their own terms, and then asking how does that play out in our um, in the how does that play out either consciously or subconsciously in how Black people see themselves, right? Can we talk about this as like the foundations of Black feminist lenses when it comes to women and women's agency and power, and even like the way that Black women have to navigate the broader world, as something that's like subconsciously or consciously present in those conversations. And I wanted to do that with this image because, like, the broader image, which is talking about the Sunday mask, and showing the Sunday mask as a depiction of this like feminine ideal next to, you know, the initiate that has recently exited the Sunday bush. You know, I wanted to see how that all came full circle. You know, I think a lot
Mhm.
of the conversations about Blackness, you know, will subconsciously have these elements of African aesthetics and philosophy there. But the work isn't always done to like really take African philosophy and aesthetics seriously in
Mhm.
analysis. So that was
Mhm.
something that I was really interested in through this practice of like just drawing a portrait and emphasizing those elements that you know, Sylvia Arden Boone is talking about in that work. And I'm just one more thing, because I know that I'm being super long-winded and we've already gone through like half of the time right now.
It's so rich though.
But what's fascinating about Sylvia Arden Boone is that she's not idealizing Sunday. She's also
No.
talking about there's also like marginalization of women in there, along with women's empowerment. There's also
Mhm.
ways in which like Sunday like practices do not neatly conform with our ideas of you know, like what is a decolonized? It doesn't neatly conform to all of those things. But she's not only looking at them on their own terms, but is able to make those connections because of her dual position
That's
as
right.
both insider and outsider. She is not Mende, but she is a Black American woman whose cultural experiences are informed consciously and subconsciously by, if not the Mende cultural, if not Mende culture specifically, but by broader cultural concerns that inform Afro-American culture. So she's making connections about why hair is important, why it's important, if to like care for children's skin and how that shows love and how that shows like your attention and your care for your children. She's able to make these very specific connections, like as an African American, without simply looking at it through a distinctly African American lens. And it's a delicate balance that she does in that work, that's very like important and also makes that work so special as an African American who's looking at African artwork
Mhm.
and then trying to look at it at its own terms, but also understanding the connection that it has to African American Afro diasporic experiences.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that journey, Stephen. I feel like it's a really wonderful way to segue for us because the portraits that you've just discussed are so rooted in individuals who are important parts of your life or who have become connected to you through extended kin work systems. Um, and I think one of the things that's so powerful about the work that you do is how labor intensive it is. And so, what's important for you all to know is if you see a work by Stephen Hamilton, if you have the pleasure of seeing the work in person, you'll note that there are several layers of artistic craft being deployed. I am talking about the creation of the dyes, the sorting of the cotton, the weaving of the cotton to create a textile, the painting of a textile, the carving of wood, the metalworking, all of these different elements of process are incorporated in your artisanal practice. And I think it's a testament to your commitment to long form artistic practice, recognizing that there are so many ways in which you could shortcut straight to painting on canvas, and
Mm-hmm.
that is beautiful. But your investment in the creation of works from start to finish really indicates, I think, an interest and investment in both traditional practices of artisanal works from West Africa and the incorporation of 20th century and 21st century painting and illustration techniques that you've incorporated from formal training in West Africa and formal training in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
um so yes, I wanted to offer you a brief moment to reflect on that before we segue into passages.
Awesome. I have to thank Chief Nike Okundaye. I have to thank my teacher, Miss Agnes Umeche, Master Weaver. If you've ever seen, like, just look up Nigerian Women's Weaving Nike Center, you've probably seen an image of Miss Agnes, who is from the town of Okene, which is known for its production of beautiful textiles. My teacher, Mr. Kunle Arumi, who was my wood carving teacher when I was in Nigeria. Like, these are the people who really helped me not only learn these art forms, but also to learn some of the historical context in which they were made. Like, even just having conversations with Chief Nike, like, the woman is like a walking book, and she
Mm.
not only had her experience as a weaver, she learned weaving when she was young. She's part of like that, probably that last generation or close to that last generation of people who were weaving or was trained by like those last generations of people who were trained as weavers as part of their like profession. Like, that was like
Mm.
in Ogidi and like all over Kogi State, that was a primary profession of most women. They were weaving for like their income, their livelihood. Um, so that's something that's very important, and it showed like a respect. It gave me a respect for the art form and the craft, but also understanding how these women think as like artists, as creative people, how they like not only pay attention to their art form and craft as like, okay, this is like a means to an end, but as like also a source of creativity
Mm.
and personal challenge in terms of like what they create and what they're able to create. beyond like simply weaving as a profession. It was very interesting and it was an amazing experience. And also just to be able to receive all of that traditional knowledge in context, which then set me on the path to do further research on these art forms. Like a lot of the work that I do using natural African dyes, it wasn't necessarily taught there. I was taught how to process indigo using a process that is very difficult for me to reproduce in the United States.
Mm.
Working with kola nut and red sorghum leaves. But a lot of work I'm doing with camwood, a lot of work that I'm doing with like things that are with like iron tannate, so using different tannin sources and saddening them or altering them with iron. A lot of that came from research that I was doing on these practices, not only when I was there, but also when I came back to the United States. It sparked that interest in natural dyeing with me. I wasn't doing natural dyeing before I went there. But it's also important for me to do these practices because it's important to understand that weaving is an art form.
Mhm.
Adire is an art form. Like these wood carving is an art form. I'm
Mhm.
not only interested in reproducing what this looks like on a painting. It's important that like all of that labor, all of that work goes into making this thing, which is
Mhm.
just as much a part of the piece as the painting itself, right?
That's right.
So the reason why I'm going through these very long processes, and they are very long, like very involved processes, is because like it has to be made that way in order for the work to have the impact that it has, in order for it to say the things that it
Mm.
says, and in order for the references which people may not be able to get just like automatically, in order for you to have a deeper subconscious understanding of the references that I make, which are talking about African textiles as an art form, the role that it has in West and West Central African societies, as also not only a beautiful thing, but also a marker of personhood, an embodiment of all of these different like more esoteric concepts. The references to like wall hangings and all these other uses for textiles that go beyond them as like clothing. In order for that to really be there, I have to engage in these practices in the way that I engage them. And it also helps me understand like how historic textiles were made through the act of making them. So I learn about how like these historic industries may have functioned by engaging in that labor myself. Like when
Mhm.
writers on the Longo Coast are writing about they make these textiles that they dye with logwoods, and understanding these like industries. It's like, okay, what does it actually mean to dye with that stuff? What does it mean
Mhm.
to dye with barwood? When they're talking about logwoods, they're talking about barwood, camwood in that context. But what is it? What is the labor that goes into making that? What does it mean to make a piece from start to finish, using only naturally dyed textiles? How much labor goes into that type of work?
Mm.
And if I'm having any sort of academic conversation about production, you
That's
know,
right.
like I need to be able to understand that beyond, this is what some, outside observer who most of the times is not a weaver or textile artist themselves, what they're they don't know what they're talking about half the time when they're like talking about like,
Mhm.
what goes into making these things. What does that actually look like?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's an important part of my research, but also the artwork wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't incorporating those materials. And one more thing, this is going to sound really woo woo, but these are ancestral art forms.
Ay, bobo.
Like
Ashe.
these are
That's right.
ancestral art forms. Me doing this is a way of
Mhm.
me reconnecting with
Mhm.
ancestors. It's a way of me reconnecting with these forms of labor that were an important part of everyday life,
That's right.
for millions of like our ancestors in the diaspora. That's just a reality. If you're looking at like what textile production looked like during pre-industrialization, in order to make all of those textiles, you need millions of people who are
Mhm.
weaving to produce things for domestic use and also for trade. That's a reality
Mhm.
of life for a lot of people in the African continent. And reconnecting with those art forms helps us understand them in ways beyond, us thinking about plantation labor as solely plantation labor. Our relationship with cotton, our relationship with indigo, our relationship with like sewing and handcraft and all these other things goes beyond our time in the Americas, right? It's transformed by that, but it goes beyond that. So understanding it in that context gives me a better understanding of what our relationships with those art forms are in our present day. How are we relating to the making of clothing? How are we relating to
Mhm.
clothing itself? How are we relating to, the types of labor that are often exploitative, that were exploited, like in the Americas, like picking cotton, which is not only something that relates to plantation exploitation, but also sharecropping and our cultural relationship with that as a material. All of that, for me, I wrestle with that through making. I wrestle with that through my artistic practice.
Mhm.
So I know that's a very long-winded, way of talking about it, but that's something that's very important to me as a maker, as an artist, as a researcher, as a person, as a member of the African diaspora. It's an important thing.
I so appreciate that thoughtful reflection. And I think that your emphasis about this being an ancestral practice of recollection and innovation within tradition really helps us to understand the series passages. And so, Stephen and I wanted to share with you all a symbol that we feel is fairly well ensconced in the literature as a key icon of Congo cosmology coming from Central Africa. So here, when we're speaking about Congo, we're speaking about the ancient kingdom of Congo, which is the regions of Congo Brazzaville, Congo Kinshasa, Angola, Cabinda. This was a kingdom that reigned roughly between the 14th and 18th centuries and really experienced the height of its time in the 1500s, 1600s. Citizens of, ancient Congo were cosmopolitan. They were, Catholic. They belonged to indigenous religious traditions. And they are an extremely important part of Black Atlantic history because of the large percentage of Central Africans who were enslaved and transported forcibly to the Americas. I mean, we're talking about in regions such as Brazil and in Haiti, anywhere as much as 40 to 60 or 70%, looking at southeastern regions of the United States, including Atlanta, Georgia, where I am, but also places like New Orleans, these regions, these belts of the United States being heavily populated with Kongo communities. And this is a symbol known as the Dikenga, which is identified as a cosmogram or a map portrait of the universe. When I first encountered the series that Stephen created entitled Passages, immediately what came to mind was the Dikenga, because it's a series of 5 portraits, and we are going to miraculously move through them with intentionality and, speed, to be mindful of time. But what I really want to highlight is the idea of this Dikenga, this portrait of the universe being a representation of time, space, and reality. So we begin with Kala and birth, moving through the cycles of the day and the cycles of the year in terms of seasons to arrive at Tukula, the second moment of the sun, which you'll encounter momentarily. The height of the day is noon, and we reach the maturity of our prime years and the maturity of elder ages. That moves us into fall and that moves us into November, which is the sunset. And that takes us then into winter. Death moves us to Musoni and to the other realm, the invisible realm of spirits, known as Mpemba, known as Kalunga, depending on regions. The sacred waters of Kalunga divide the living realm and the spiritual realm. But after winter comes spring. And so we are brought forward to rebirth in this cyclical portrait of, as I said, time and space as a portrait of reality. So this is a representation of the universe and an understanding of the world. To use Oyeronke Oyewumi's concept of world sense, this is a different world view or a different world sense. And so I want to invite you, Stephen, to speak about 3 pieces. I'm going to offer some very brief reflections, but I want to make sure that we have time for Tukula because that is the work that you can see right now at Brandeis, at the Rose Museum. And so this work is Caul Born. It is a masterful representation of a figure submerged partially in water. And the caul is regarded as the veil or parts of, or the full components of the embryonic sac, which a child is sustained by in a mother's womb, in a person's womb. And upon birth, somebody who is Caul Born is one who is partially or entirely enveloped still in the embryonic sac. These children are said to be mystically gifted with powers to see in the invisible realm of spirits, which is where ancestors and spirits reside, as well as those not yet born. And so this work to me really signaled what it means to reflect on those who are mystically powerful, those who are gifted from birth, almost from time immemorial. And the positionality of this work really calls to mind, too, those who are born breech birth. And so those who are born breech birth are those who are born with feet first rather than head first. In cosmologies of Kongo and in Haitian Vodou, for instance, those with these mystic births call babies born with teeth, babies born with hair, babies born with an extra digit, twins and triplets, albinos, little people, breech birth, all of these figures born with the umbilical cord tied around their necks are regarded as mystically gifted and having powers from the other realm. There's a magnificent close up here that we can see of this textile that's included in Caul Born. Stephen, did you want to offer some reflection here before we move to Tukula?
Yes, what I want to thank you so much for that. I mean, that beautifully stated, Kira. And I think this one is a very personal one to me because this is also looking at family lore.
Mhm.
Because my great great grandfather, I hope I get his name right, Henry Harry Glenn, was
Right.
born with a caul. He was born with a veil. And like the way that they would say it, my family's from Southern West Virginia, they would say he saw haints because
Mm.
like he would be able to see like he saw like the dead, he saw spirits. And the way that like my aunt always says it is like it was almost like a joke that he would play on like children, on like the grandchildren. But it was something that people also took seriously. Even my great grandmother, who was like a very like educated woman, like she was a salutatorian at her high school. She would have went to college if they had like the money for it. It's like they deeply believed these things, right? And I'm also not going to pretend like even with my like modern logical sense that I don't also believe these things. I'm not going to also pretend like I don't give them a little bit of credence as well. But for me, it was very fascinating because this was like a direct sort of connection with this cosmology, like this idea of like the mapping of the universe and how that plays out in your daily life.
Mhm.
This idea that because you were born with a piece of the other world on your face, that you can still see
Yes,
into that other world.
that's right.
That shows a structuring of the universe that's subconsciously present in people who on the surface are like, oh, you die, you go to heaven, and that's where you are. Like that's the ideology
Hmm.
that's like at the surface, but underneath it is still like this structuring of the universe. The same thing with reincarnation. This child's been here before. Like somebody passes away, you have to give them the person's name if they find out that you find out that you're pregnant. Like when they pass, like there's a specific way that you
Hmm.
understand the universe being structured, the cosmos being structured when when you have those beliefs, right? And I thought that that was really fascinating, and like I'm African American, so that's also creolized with Irish traditions, Native American traditions, all these different things too.
Hmm.
But there is still an ontological presence of Africa in the way that we move through the world, and that was like one of the clearest examples. So I was thinking about him when I was making this piece, and I was also thinking about how in Yoruba land, when you're born with a veil, with a caul, you're meant to enter a masking society because you are born with a mask,
Mm.
right? And like also the masks are also depending on the mask too, because all of it's like layered and complicated. I don't want to speak in generalizations because people speak in generalizations about Africa too much. But when you're thinking about like masquerade traditions, the spirits are literally entering the world again. So this is also
Hmm.
talking about this
Hmm.
connection with this quote, this very real and visible world. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's the one of the things behind this piece.
Caul Born. And I have to say that I was writing about this piece when I gave birth to my child who was breech-born. So that piece has deep personal resonance for the two of us.
Mhm.
We have to speak about Tukula because it is stunning visually, textually, and that I mean really material wise, not in terms of it as a written text, but in terms of the texture of the work. Um, to me, this was a piece that invites us into time travel. It is a work in which we see one gentleman with back turned to us, framed with a red halo, with birds, parrots with red parrot feathers flying off into a dusk maroon crimson sky, and another figure facing us with hair that is longer, with a beard that signals a wiser and more mature version of the figure on the left is facing us now. Bracelets that suggest possible initiation into a Lemba ritual healing society of the ancient Kongo kingdom, which plays a very important role as a community of commerce, a brotherhood, an initiatory society. Women were also allowed to partake of the Lemba society. And today, Lemba is actually recognized as a spirit of the forest and of mystic healing today in Haiti in the Haitian pantheon of spirits. So that is a very transatlantic piece that we see here with deep Congo roots. Um, the tassels on the right hand side are so ornately done, looking like a finely woven rug. And on the left, we have the textile not yet finished, intentionally so, almost draped like a masquerade raffia mask. Um, yeah, I'll invite you to speak about this work, Stephen, what inspired you and what your insights can offer for greater understanding of the piece.
This is a piece that's inspired by one of my favorite scholars, Foucault Bonseki. I love his work. There are some valid criticisms of Foucault Bonseki, but what I love about his work is that he was a Congo scholar. He also worked, as a sociologist, like uh, uh, as a sociologist, as like a not necessarily a sociologist. He was somebody who worked as an anthropologist who like collected a lot of information about the Lemba society in his home region of Manyaga in Congo. He was initiated himself. And he was writing not only as a scholar, but as a cultural insider. I'm sure other people who are deeper scholars of his work will be sure to correct me on that. But he was doing a lot of anthropological field work there, in addition to undergoing training in these concepts, in these like schools of thought in his home region of Manyanga in Congo. So he has a lot of respect from like leading scholars in Congo religion and philosophy, right? But he also has a huge amount of respect from people who are practitioners and scholars of Congo-based religions, not only in Africa, but also in the diaspora. He also has a presence amongst people who are not necessarily initiated into Congo religious traditions. But, if we're looking at like the Black Power movement, if we're looking at sort of like these periods of time, like especially if you're looking at like the late 80s, early 90s, like sort of resurgence and like looking at to Africa for like thinking about ways in which you can raise your children and live your life. He also had a large African American following through that. But I say all that to say it is because of him that we have these modern versions of the Dikenga, right? The version of the Dikenga that we see is a description of the Dikenga as it exists, you know, as it exists in Manyaga for the Lemba Society in Manyaga. That's like how he that's how it's envisioned in that particular region. There's a lot of different versions of Dikenga with different definitions of the four moments of the sun. It's the same symbol, but like the version that we know is his version. And when he's talking about Tukula, when he's talking about this moment of transition into adulthood and the fact that the red camwood, the heat of the red camwood, which has all these fascinating contradictory gender associations. It's feminine, it's masculine, it's powerful, it symbolizes power moving. Wyatt McGaffey talks about like red symbolizing power moving between, worlds. And the substance, which is used across Africa, camwood, barwood, has this meaning symbolizing transition and initiation across Africa. Has all of these different like overlapping meanings and connotations across West and West Central Africa. So, like for me, it's important to mark that one of the main materials ties to the conceptual elements of the piece, which is supposed to show this moment of transition for this young man. That camwood is what the fabric is dyed in. It's dyed in that substance. So the name Tukula is not only the name of that moment of the sun, which it's representative of, like that halo around his head, which takes its form from like carved patterns that you see on wooden bells in Congo. It's not only representing that moment of sun, which is like happening in this moment, like this transition into adulthood that's happening, but it's also in the piece itself. The piece is made of tukula. It's made of that substance, which is a ritual substance that's there. Another important element is that I also was fascinated with these elements of dance in Congo. So like if you look up like dances from Congo, like there's all these like sort of national dance troupes like across Democratic Republic of Congo and also Congo Brazzaville. So you see like all these YouTube videos that circulate, but there's like beautiful ones that show Congo dances. And the men are wearing these like very old, what appear like raffia skirts. They look like they're made out of raffia cloth that has been like degraded, like really like that are very, very old. But you see like these voluminous like textiles that they're wearing, and as they move, you see how the textiles move with the movements of their hips and the movements of their waists. And I wanted to show that. I wanted to show that sort of voluminous, like rapid movement and power in the movement of the dance. So that's something that's like very like important in the piece. Like I wanted it to also like represent, you know, that like power and that movement, and like I wanted you to be able to move, feel the movement in the piece, because like that red is symbolizing movement, it's symbolizing power as it's moving in these different places. So it's not something that's static, it's something that's like energized, it's something that is constantly in transition. And I also wanted to make references to like the textile traditions of Congo. None of the textiles that I wove is nearly as elaborate as like what would be part of like the repertoire of like elite or royal textiles in Congo or any of like the affiliated kingdoms. So like, you have the Congo kingdom. There are multiple different kingdoms, Congo-speaking kingdoms, and even their neighbors like the Mbundu and the Teke, they have like very, very similar cosmologies and world senses and worldviews. They common origin stories, all of these different things. What I'm making is nowhere near as elaborate and beautiful as what they made they used to make in the past, or even make in the present day. But I also wanted to make a reference to textiles, not only in the fabric itself, but also how I'm depicting it, because the movement of their bodies and the way that that textile is activated by the movement is something I wanted to capture. And for folks that are probably more familiar with Kuba textiles, the Kuba people live in the Kasai region, which is miles inland from Congo, still very much influenced by Congo-speaking people and other like Bantu-speaking weaving cultures. They also wear these voluminous, beautiful raffia skirts that are activated by the very powerful, energetic movements of male dancers, right? So I also wanted to draw that connection. It's like these are also things that are meant to be experienced as they move.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. And in the interest of time, though we could go on for 3 or 4 more hours, I'm going to escort us past these two magnificent works at the waterline, representing Luvemba, representing this sun setting, and the ripples of the water can be seen here in the painting and the coloring of the textiles. And water spirits, which represents Musoni to me, this other realm of masks, of spirits, of entities whose names we know and do not know, because we have to conclude with the dance of the titled mothers. It just wouldn't be any other way for me
Yeah.
to end this work. We've seen some of the passages, some of the points of the Dikenga, some of the points of these life cycles, beginning with a story of men, their evolution, their growth. And we conclude here with a circle of women who are representing a diversity of Nigerian women from different ethnic groups, who are dancing regally in robes underwater, illuminated by Bishir fish, which Stephen taught me about, illuminated by these silvery white fish. If you could share with us a bit about this work as we conclude, Stephen, why does it have to end and begin again with the dance of the titled mothers? How is
So,
this rebirth?
so again, I am going to, all of my training and my understanding about traditional African religions and philosophy, you need to give the mothers their due.
Ay, bobo,
You have to give the mothers their due. You have to recognize their existence and their power because there are consequences if you don't.
okay.
So it's important to remember that everything begins and ends with them. The woman
Brought
carried
you
you
into
before
this
you were
world, they
anything
could
at
take
all.
you out.
They brought you into the world, they could take you out. That's not just a funny thing that Black mothers say. It's also like a
True.
deep ontological understanding of the role of feminine power in the world, in the universe. You have to recognize them.
Mhm.
It's important to understand that power is ambivalent. It can work with you, it can work
Mhm.
against you, consciously or subconsciously. Your failure to understand and recognize the power of women, the power of these feminine forces, can lead to disaster. So this idea of them, they are in this place, they are in this spiritual world, and they are bringing something into the world. What are they bringing? Are they bringing something constructive or destructive? Is that constructive thing necessary, or is that destructive thing necessary? It's
Mhm.
important to understand and recognize that power as feminine power. When we think about the earth, we think about water, which is generative and nurturing, but also destructive. The earth nurtures us in life and eats us in death. That is the
Mm.
reality of feminine force as it's understood in many African cultures, is that it is
Mhm.
something that can be creative or destructive depending on the context.
Mhm.
And that is something that I think is very fascinating to me and very important to me. And also sort of disrupting these ideas. Like there's a lot of scholars who talk about this in terms of Black feminist circles, the way that Black women's experiences and this idea of Black womanhood and how they navigate the world disrupts this dichotomy of womanhood as understood as something that is innately passive or weak,
Mhm.
right? And sort of this like what they call the masculinization of Black. I don't want to speak for Black feminist scholars at all, but um, I want to say that what's important for me as somebody who explores these ideas to understand and appreciate complexity and ambivalence, to
Mhm.
understand that there are things that can inhabit both powers at the same time. And when I'm looking at these depictions of the titled mothers, these Black female elders, their ability to embody contradictory ideas gives them and energies and powers give them strength and power. And that's something we always have to remind ourselves of as we're navigating the world and understanding the world. So it's
Mhm.
important to not only recognize them and recognize their contributions to the world, both seen and unseen. It's also important for us to also learn the fact that all of these things are a lot more complicated than oftentimes we wish to admit or acknowledge.
I think that's a beautiful place to conclude. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. I want to offer my warm expression of gratitude to Stephen Hamilton for sharing his work. For those of you who are interested in seeing more, please come to the Rose Museum to see Tukula in person. Please visit the rest of Stephen Hamilton's beautiful artwork around Boston. And please feel free to check out my article, which offers a deeper dive into these works' passages. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kira. Thank you, Stephen. I can't even there are no words to express how grateful we all are for such a deep dive into not just the art, but the way it's made, the way it makes worlds and cosmologies and navigates beauty and gender and spirit and physicality. And someplace you said, Stephen, that you see your artwork as a bridge. And it really does bridge so many worlds and brings them all together. Kira, without your knowledge and without you engaging in this conversation with Stephen, I don't see how we could have touched upon so many important points. And you're right, I could continue listening to this riveting conversation forever. So please come to the Rose Art Museum, see our incredible Tukula. I'm so proud that we brought it into our permanent collection the year it was created, plus all the drawings that you saw. Stephen, thanks for your brilliance as an artist, and Kira, thanks for your brilliance as a scholar. Bye, everyone. Thank you.